Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The number of homeless people in England has reached the highest level since current records began in 2010. There were more than 4,700 people sleeping rough on a single night in the autumn of 2017. That's up 15% on the previous year.
Well, Sky's Ashish Joshi is here. Ashish, why are we seeing this rise in figures?
We're seeing this rise in figures according to campaigners because it's getting more and more difficult for many people to find accommodation, to put a roof over their heads. They can't afford it. Benefits are being cut. There's a whole host of reasons if you speak to campaigners. And ultimately, they've been putting pressure on the government to try and do something about this, to tackle the growing numbers of rough sleepers we see on the streets of cities up and down the country. Now, this figure, which has been produced by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, will come as a real disappointment. 4,751, up, as you said, 15%. From 4,134 to the highest point since records began, at a time when we understand the impact it has on somebody sleeping rough, on their mental health, their physical health, and the fact that there are so many charities out there supporting these people and urging the government to do something. Here's what the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, had to say about what he was doing in Manchester.
I think it's a humanitarian crisis that's unfolding before our eyes, and the public here don't just walk past people in the doorways, they want something to be done. So as Mayor, I'm doing my best. We're going to be saying later today that we're going to be expanding our Housing First programme. This is a programme where people get somewhere to live, but also add on support to help them deal with the issues that they have in their lives. We're going to expand that to around 500 places. So we are putting plans in place. The problem is getting worse, but our response is also getting better.
Over Christmas, Ashish, Euston Station opened up its doors for homeless people to give them food. I mean, at the time, I guess it would make people feel nice, but the reality of that is very different. I mean, that's not a practical thing. It's about practical steps moving forward.
There are soup kitchens which are open throughout the year, not just at Christmas. There are people out on the streets giving away blankets, tents, sleeping bags, food, items of clothing. But the fact is that if the numbers of homeless people are rising, then more needs to be done. And the chief executive of the charity Crisis said that these figures were catastrophic. Now, he deals with homelessness on a daily basis, and what he wants is the government, its pledge to tackle rough sleeping with this initiative of the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Task Force. He really wants them to do something more than just play lip service to the issue.
OK, Ashish, thank you.
Homeless charities have branded a sharp rise in the number of rough sleepers in England a catastrophe. Numbers have hit record levels since the Conservatives took power in 2010, and some of those on the streets say the system is letting them down, as Dan Rivers reports.
It is the crisis hiding in plain sight. Often ignored or passed by, Britain's homeless population has reached record levels. Ben's been sleeping rough on London streets since he spiralled into drug use 15 years ago. Do you notice more people on the street?
There is a hell of a lot more coming out here, and it's every day it's getting worse. I mean, and there's just nothing being done about it. There's just absolute jack. There's nothing.
200 miles north on the rain-soaked pavements of Manchester, it's the same story. There's no way out for rough sleepers like Dave.
Because I've not got anywhere to live, I can't get a job. That's the only thing stopping me from getting a job, is somewhere to live.
The most recent figures show more than 4,700 people a night sleeping rough on England's streets. That's up 169% compared to when the numbers were first recorded in 2010, and only around 1,700 people were sleeping rough.
Well, there's a terrible lack of affordable housing in London. That's one thing. There's also welfare cuts, which have meant that housing benefit just hasn't kept pace with the cost of renting accommodation.
These figures show that a quarter of rough sleepers are here in London, but charities are warning that the true picture may be far, far worse, that this may just be the tip of the iceberg. The government refused to give an interview about this, but in a statement today claimed it's providing an extra £1 billion of funding to tackle rough sleeping. But for people like Ben, every night here is an ordeal.
I've started getting the mentality now that every day that I wake up, it's just another day closer to death. If I didn't wake up tomorrow, sometimes I think it'd be a blessing, because then I wouldn't have to do another 24 hours of this. It's horrible.
Just one of the thousands of people who feel the system has failed them, who are preparing to bed down on Britain's streets once again. Dan Rivers, ITV News.
The number of people sleeping rough in England is the highest it's been in the last decade, soaring by almost 75% in the past 3 years. New figures, based on a snapshot from a single night in autumn last year, estimate there were around 4,751 people sleeping on the streets, a quarter of them in London. The government insisted it was investing £550 million over the next 2 years. But homelessness charities described it as a catastrophe, warning the true figures are likely to be far higher. Our health and social care correspondent, Victoria MacDonald, reports.
Midday in Camden in North London, and we spot the council's outreach team talking to a man who's been sleeping rough. We later spoke to him. He didn't want to be identified.
I mean, I've slept everywhere from doorways, yeah, to blocks of flats, to train stations. So the other night, yeah, I was shunting 3 times through the night. All right, why they can't just think, well, he's asleep, he's not doing no wrong. We'll wake him up at 9 o'clock.
And today's official rough sleeper figures show a trend that homelessness charities describe as a catastrophe. Westminster still has the highest number, but Camden has seen the largest increase. Since 2016, the numbers of rough sleepers in the borough have risen 647%. If you count from 2010, it's more than 1,000%.
The dramatic, and it really is a dramatic rise in the number of people sleeping homeless here in Camden, can perhaps be partly explained by better counting, although you speak to charities and they're sceptical about that. The fact is, they say, you look around you, especially at night, and there just are more people sleeping rough.
Channel 4 News also filmed in Camden in November when it was 0 degrees. That's the same month the official count took place. On one night, there were 127 rough sleepers, compared with practically none in 2010. The council itself says rough sleeping is at unprecedented levels, and they blame austerity. Back to lunchtime today, and we meet John Glacken, who's been homeless himself.
I've seen more and more homeless people. I mean, the figures bear that out. Recently, I'm seeing a lot more younger people, a lot more women. I mean, because under 21s now aren't getting the housing benefits, so they're just left to fend for themselves. The parents cannot afford to keep them there. They're going to the streets. There's no option for them. There's nowhere for them to go. And this is 21st century Britain. I mean, there's no reason whatsoever for it.
Today's official figures for England reveal London has seen a 174% increase in rough sleeping since 2016. Tameside in the northeast saw a 126% increase, and in Medway in the southeast it was a 214% rise in rough sleeping since 2016.
Well, the most frustrating thing about all of this is that there are proven ways of tackling rough sleeping. We know that if we move people quickly off the street, then they're less likely to develop more complex support needs. We know if you move people who are vulnerable straight into settled housing and provide the specialist support they need, then they're far more likely to stay in that accommodation.
The Minister for Housing and Homelessness was not available for interviews today, but in a statement the government said,
"We are providing over £1 billion of funding, supporting rough sleepers with the most complex needs through a new Housing First approach and bringing in the most ambitious legislation in decades that will mean people get the support they need earlier."
From April, new legislation will mean that councils will have a legal duty to prevent and relieve homelessness. John Glacken, who's seen it firsthand, says the simple answer is homeless people need homes. Only then will the numbers start to fall.
Victoria MacDonald reporting.